Alright, so in this tutorial what I'm going to do is just show you guys how to do your general lighting. I'm not expecting anything too great. We're going to do it very simple and very straightforward. Okay, so first things first, we want to do is you light to the camera, meaning you know, from the perspective that if you were to shoot this and you're making your footage, you want it to be lit from there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just try to position the camera roughly where I would want it to be. So let's just say this is my scene. Now, the problem is, you may already notice this, but if I hit render, it's not going to render exactly what this is. It's going to render a certain resolution, okay? So what you want to do is let's just set that up so it renders at the correct resolution. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this render settings. And go ahead and switch it to Maya Software instead of Arnold, because we're not going to be doing Arnold anyway. So Maya Software, and then I just want you to scroll down all the way to the bottom, and you'll see where it says HD 540 for the presets. We're going to do HD 720, so it'll be 1280 by 720. Obviously, 1920 by 1080 or 1080p is obviously preferred. However, it's not really so possible, just because if you did try to render it, it's not even double the render time. It's like quadruple the render time. So HD 720 is a good middle of the road, you know, because HD 540 is not. That's not HD. 960 by 540 is garbage. So, but 1280 by 720 is acceptable. So we'll just say okay with that. We're gonna come back in here eventually, but just so we have that, exit out of that, and then to actually see what would be rendered is you go over here. This is the resolution gate. This little blue ball in a box. And you can see right up here it says 1280 by 720. So this is what it would look like if I were to render this. So I'm just going to frame it how I want it to look. Yay! Okay, so we'll say that's what it should be. Alright, so let's go ahead and put the lights in there. So, there's a couple different options for lights. So to turn on texturing, we'll turn this on, so you'd want that on. And if you click on this, it'll turn lighting on, and you'll see it's black. And why is it black? It's because there's no lights, right? So I'm going to turn that back off. So let's put some lights in there. So go to Create, Lights, and you'll see that basically there are these options for lights. These are the general generic Maya lights. But there are, depending if you have a different kind of renderer, then you might have different kind of lights. But these ones will work kind of universally. So we have, each one of these are meant to more or less be similar to a real world scenario. So ambient light is what the name suggests. These are all what the name suggests. Basically, it's light in all directions. Okay, so the real world kind of example of this would be if you go outside and it's not a sunny day, you don't have direct sunlight. It's like it's an overcast, but there's just light in general being diffused throughout everywhere, right? Or if you're in like a room and it's got this real even light, like light from all directions, that would be ambient light. Okay. So that's useful never. That's when we never use that because it's just ugly. If you take photos out with an overcast, there's no strong shadows. It doesn't show form well. It makes everything look flat. So generally, for the most part, unless you have a specific reason, we do not use ambient light. So you can forget that one. Directional light. Directional light is like the wind. Basically, it'll come from from infinitely one direction and go infinitely in another direction. Doesn't matter where you place it. It's just like the wind. That's the way I look at it. It just blows across the entire scene. The best example of this in a real world scenario would basically be if you did go outside on a sunny day. Directional light is kind of what you would see because it's just light that floods the entire, you know, Earth, right? Universally and in one general direction. So light obviously has an origin position, and generally it will disperse outwards. Okay, which means that for the most part, light rays do not they're not parallel. But because the sun is so large and we are so far away from the sun, that the light rays would actually have that appearance of being parallel. So that's really good for like outside. It's also good as helper light. So you know, you might have a main light source of like a lamp or something, or like a ceiling light coming down, but you can still see under the person because what happens is that the light comes down, it hits the ground and it bounces off, and then it lights the person. It fills the dark areas underneath. So we use those for those as well, just for general bounce lights. There's also point light. which is what the name suggests. Basically, it's if there's a point in space and light just shoots out from all directions from that point. So you can think of like a light bulb or a flame or a fairy sparkle, you know, just anything that's like just a point of light that shoots out all over the place. Spotlight is a spotlight. If you look at the image there, you can see it basically looks like a flashlight. Think of like headlights on a car, or if you have a lamp, right, with a shade on it, you can see it comes out as a cone. Basically creates a cone of light. Batman signal. It's what you would think would be area light. The idea behind this is that it creates a shape of light. So typically, by default, it's going to be a rectilinear shape, and it just projects light uniformly out of that shape. So that's really good for, like, let's say a TV screen, right? Because there's little, pixels, and each one of them are shooting out. Or actually, there's a light plate behind it that's shooting through the pixels, but most of the time, anyways. Anyway, so it's shooting out through that. Or you could use it for like a window where light's coming through, or if you have like those drop ceilings and you have those like box lights that are projecting light, like that sort of stuff. And volume light, basically it's a lot like a point light, creates light, but it's in a shape, a three-dimensional shape. So by default, that shape is a sphere. And that's really nice because you can actually adjust the fall off because it won't go past that sphere. It'll only go into that amount of area. So normally what you would do is you would create like your practical lights. So what I mean by that are the lights that actually exist in the scene. So if you have a lamp in one corner and you have a ceiling light and maybe a window, you would create lights for all of those. And then afterwards, you would apply helper lights. But we're going to do a real cheapo, kind of quick, easy way of doing this. And we're just going to do a normal kind of general 3-point lighting. And so 3-point lighting means that you have basically a key light, a fill light, and a rim light, okay? So the key light is your main light. It's meant to be the light that has the main source. And it comes across and it generally creates the shadows. All of your shadows and all of your highlights are derived from that light. That's meant to be the main light source. And then the other lights would be supportive. So a fill light just fills in where it would be black otherwise. And the rim light is meant to catch anything that basically the fill light doesn't. Usually it's a bright rim you'll see on behind them. Kind of, it cuts in like the silhouette. All right. So for all of those, we're just going to use directional light because it's the easiest. So select directional light. You can see, I'm just going to pull this up so you can see it. Now you can scale it. Usually I will scale it bigger or smaller depending on. It doesn't affect the way it works at all. It also doesn't matter where you put this. I can put it over here, over there. Because like I said, it's just going from one direction to another. So since I'm looking this direction, I'm going to go ahead and I want it kind of pointing down in like this way, right? Across and down like a 3/4. I'm going to go ahead and put on my lights. And you can kind of see how this is working, right? But you can see there's no shadows, right? So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to go ahead and turn on shadows too. Oh, why is it black? The reason why it's black is if you remember, this is inside a sphere. And so since the light is coming from over here and through and down, it's hitting this, and that's basically occluding anything that could potentially be seen. So you want to select your background sphere here. So you might need to put on your channel box. I have mine referenced. Select it. And then I'm just going to go to the attribute editor, go into render stats. You remember how we made it not double-sided so that it would be see-through? There's another option here for cast shadows. Just turn that off. And now that won't cast shadows and your light will project through it. Okay. And you can use that for all sorts of things. So like, let's say you had clouds up here or something. You don't want to cast shadows, although clouds do cast shadows. So you can turn them off there as well. Okay. So we'll call that good. All right. So I'm picturing, looking from this direction. All right, so back to this. I'm going to re-reference that object. All right. Okay. So back to the attribute editor. When I have the light selected, you can see right here. So typically, it's not a good idea to just leave it pure white. Whenever you create anything, whether it's a character who's white or a character who's black, or it's a surface that's white or surface that's black or whatever, you don't want to use just pure white or pure black. You should add a tint of color to it. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and add just a slight yellow to it just because yellow is a little bit warm, so it's going to make it a little bit creamy. Intensity, I'm going to do 1.25, make it a little bit stronger. Illuminates by default, that's just an on-off switch. Emit diffuse, that's the general lighting, and specular is the highlight. open up shadows, and you'll see there's two options here. There is the depth map shadows and ray trace shadows. Just make sure ray trace is turned on. It should be by default anyway, but that should be on. Okay, so there's my key light. That's my main light. That's the main source. You can see kind of what it looks like here. All right, now what we're going to do is make our fill light, okay? So actually I'm going to cut this a little bit more this way. But let's say we're over here. See how this is black over here, right? You can see like, so this is absolute black. That's not normal. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this light, Control D, and I'm just going to move it over here. And I'm going to use this light as my fill light. I'm going to turn it and basically kind of go the opposite direction, going this direction, so that it will fill, like that, I guess, so that it will fill basically any of the shadow areas, right? So actually, we're supposed to be shooting from here anyway. So something like this, so that basically anything that's getting shadow, it'll fill. Now, what I don't want to have happen is this. For one, I need to lower the intensity, so we're going to go about half. I'm going to do 0.65, we'll say. I don't want it to have a highlight, all right? Because I want the highlight to be from just this. So the highlight is basically, let's say you had a pool table, right? And you can see the little hot spot, the little white spot on the each ball on the pool table. That hot spot, that's the specular highlight, okay? And basically what a specular highlight is a reflection of the lights onto the object itself. That's literally what it is, okay? So it's kind of like reflectivity, but for light specifically. I don't want this to have that, because otherwise you'll end up with a bunch of hot spots, and it'll be kind of weird looking. So I'm just going to turn that off. See how it gets rid of this extra one here? And it gets rid of it there. So you're going to turn off emit specular. Also, notice I got like extra shadows here. See how it's getting kind of busy and it's harder to see? I also don't want it to create shadows. So I'm going to turn off use ray trace shadows as well. And that will get rid of those. So only the one is creating shadows. Not my key light creates shadows, not my fill light. Okay? Good. So there's that. I'm also going to change the color, and I'm going to go a little bit more of a kind of a coolish blue color. Okay? And that will, because typically shadows have a little bit of a coolerness in it, helps them recede, helps them move back. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to do one more light, and this is more or less going to be kind of another fill light, but it's just going to fill, it should be the rim light, but it's just going to basically, anything that the other light misses, this one will pick up. So I'm just going to Control D on that light, move this one over again. Again, the positions don't really matter. I'm going to weaken it up even more, so I'm going to do like 0.4 this time. And again, I don't want to emit specular, and I also don't want it to use shadows. So I'm going to make sure those are both still off. I'm just going to change the color, because it's good to just add a bunch of just, you know, random little colors here. Okay. And we're going to use this one. Okay. And I'm going to actually have this one go upwards a little bit like this. And that will basically cover anything that the other one missed. Actually, it should probably be more like this. Okay. All right, so basically that will fill wherever there's black. It will basically null and void it, but it's actually going to come up. This is basically what's bouncing off the ground is what we're going for here. All right, so that's the basic lights, right? Now let's see what it looks like when we render it. So you click on this to render, and it will render a frame for you. Ooh, and you might be like, that doesn't look good. The reason why it looks a little bit weird, for one, it's my software, and my software just stinks, but it's what we're working with. It doesn't have shadows. So the rendering is really kind of, there's many parts to it, but one of the things we have to do is also deal with the render settings. So I already touched it for a second, but we're going to go ahead and just kind of complete that. So I'm going to go to my render settings again. So it's the claptrap here with the gear. I'm going to go ahead and I'm on the common tab. Let's just start from the top here. So file name prefix, let's just go ahead and we'll call it shot01. So that way it's set up. And then image format, we want to do PNG. PNGs are good because they're relatively high quality. You know, they're at least a JPEG quality, but they also have a alpha channel, so they have transparency in them. So if you want to layer them, they work really well. The frame / animation extension, it's going to be name_number.extension. And then from here would be your start frame and your end frame. So one thing you're going to want to do is just scrub your timeline and make sure that everything fits in your shot. Okay, and I'm just going to say that mine's going to take 24 frames. So I'm going to say start at 1 and end at 24. Okay, the camera I'm going to be using, I'm just going to go ahead and use the perspective, but normally we would want to create multiple cameras for each shot. And we already did the HD 720. Okay, so that's not going to actually change the look of it. That's just the general settings of when you go to render, what it's going to look like. And you can see up here, it gives you a preview of where it's going to save to. So it's going to save to the desktop cone film images folder. And the name's going to be shot01_001 to shot01_0024. Okay. Because it's going to create an image sequence. All right. So go to Maya Software. And you want to change the quality to production quality. And it just automatically populates all these settings without us having to know any of this stuff. And I don't, but there's ways of basically cheating things by changing some of these numbers. But that's just, it's boring. I'm not big on the number crunching. So that's pretty good, but there is actually one issue. We need to turn ray tracing on because for whatever reason, that's not on by default. And if you remember, that's how we're doing our shadows, is ray trace shadows. So when we turn this on, this will actually give us two things. It'll give us shadows. It will also give us reflections. If you're really big into video games, they keep talking about, oh, they got real-time ray tracing. It's very computationally expensive. It's fine for what we do when you're doing a pre-rendered sequence because, you know, it could take, you know, Pixar, when they make films now, each frame is roughly an hour long, or I'm sorry, a day long to render on a huge, you know, gigantic, render farm, but that's fine because they can take all the time they want to render it out. They'll play it real time when you know, you can watch it afterwards. So, but if you're trying to render during while you're playing, you know, a game is real time rendering, obviously that's not really gonna be possible. So anyways, ray tracing, you can go ahead and exit out of that. Now hit render and you'll see you'll have your shadows. And it's going to take, so you can see how much longer it's taking. You're going to have your shadows and you're also going to have your reflections. And you can see how much better the quality is now. Now, you might have a couple of issues here. Probably a lot of you guys, if you made blends, which is what I did here, you may notice that there's reflectivity. Notice that the ground doesn't have it because the ground is actually a Lambert, so it's the sky. But these are all blends and they have reflectivity by default. So you might find that when you go to render, you actually need to adjust your materials as well. So I'm just going to close out of that. So for instance, I'll grab, let's say this guy. I'll go to his material, and I'm just going to go where reflectivity is, and just boop. And then I'm also going to take specular color, and that's going to make it have no shine, right? And then, so this one has no shine and no reflectivity. And then I'm going to take this one, and I'm going to take just reflectivity down, but I'm going to up the specular highlight. I'm going to make it tighter. I'm going to go like this, which will make it super shiny. This one, I'm going to keep I'm going to make it even more reflective. And then we'll keep that kind of tight like that, okay? So now if I hit render, see, you're going to notice probably you have a lot of reflectivity where you didn't mean to. So really what you're going to want to do is just go through and turn the reflectivity off of everything. Okay, so now you can see with this one, it has no reflectivity and no specular highlight. So it's just a nice matte. This one has the specular highlight. See the highlight here, but no reflectivity. And this one has a higher reflectivity and it has the specular highlight. So, but you might want to kind of play around with those. Sometimes it's not as obvious when you're going to render it, and you know, or when you're working on it, you don't really know real time because again, they don't even do real time ray tracing in here. Okay, so actually, you used to not even be able to get shadow, so even that's relatively new. Okay, good. So once you're happy and you know it, you clap your hands, or you just, you know, maybe a golf clap. Anyway, so we have this kind of going on. That's great. Now what we're going to do is actually go to render this out. Okay, so again, just make sure that everything fits inside of your frame here, right? So you would just scrub, make sure everything looks good. If you're happy, you're going to switch to rendering. Okay, go to rendering, and then go to render and hit batch render. And then it's going to be blah, 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 blah. And you go, yep. Now down here it's going to say results, rendering with Maya software. And you're going to see each thing as it's rendering. Now where it's rendering to, if you remember, we saw it when we were setting up the thing there. It actually will say it down here too when we were in the render settings. But it's going to render to your project folder. So whatever project folder is currently set up, that's where it's rendering to. So in our case, the first frame 2 will take longer to render than all the other ones. So it's still taking a second here. But I go to images, and then, oh, it's not even, usually it's supposed to show up here. That's weird. Well, anyway, you can actually see your frames as they're rendering, being rendered right here. Oh, you know why? These are actually from before. Alright, and for some reason, so notice that it says .iff. That's not the file format I wanted. So it's a mistake, and I can see here, this isn't what I wanted, right? So it's not good. So if you notice, oh man, it's too dark or something's weird, just go to render. Oops, try again. Render, cancel batch render. Yep. And then it'll be canceled and it'll stop rendering. Then what we're going to do is I'm just going to go back to my render settings and back to common and make sure that I switch this to PNG. See? And then I'm just going to go ahead and go render, batch render. And it will, yep, go ahead. Again, the first frame takes quite a bit of time to do the initial rendering, but then once it starts rendering, it'll actually happen pretty quick. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. And then you'll see in a second they'll start popping up, and then we can kind of preview them. But what you don't want to do is just wait for it to get done rendering all the frames, and then look. Like when it starts rendering, see if it looks okay, and if the frames look, you know, the way that you pictured them, then you're good to go, and you can just let it keep going. But if you notice that something's wrong, you can stop it before you waste all the time rendering them. So now you can see it says rendering, it says where it's rendering to, users, not cone, desktop, cone film, images, blah, blah, blah. So again, it's going to go to your project folder. And then if you remember, source images is where you put images into your scene, right? Like your character model textures and environment textures. Images are where images come out of Maya. Okay, so you're going to see each frame is going to render here, and you might notice some issues and what have you, but we're just going to kind of roll with it for now. Good. Okay, so I'm going to let that keep rendering. Now, you're going to end up getting an image sequence and not a video, okay? For whatever reason, it's really difficult to like make Maya render video directly. And quite frankly, you wouldn't be doing that anyway. If you're working in the industry, we always render out image sequences. You just have a lot more control over them. So you're going to need to cut those together. So we're just going to use After Effects for that. Come on. There we go. After Effects 2020. Now, if you want to use a different piece of software, you can. I pretty much always just use After Effects because usually you end up compositing things. In a normal rendering pipeline, what you would do is you'd render out like what we call beauty paths, which is what we're doing right now, where it's kind of everything together. Then you might render like just the characters, just the environment, just like effects, just shadows, just highlights, just, you know, you would render out different pieces of them, and then inside of After Effects, you would just composite those together. So I'm just going to let After Effects load up. Now, I'm not going to actually edit this together. I'm just going to show you how to start it. You guys should already know After Effects really at this point anyhow. But I'm going to let it take forever to initialize. Now I'm just going to go ahead and in Maya, I'm just going to go ahead and cancel this. Cancel batch render. Alright, and yep, because I don't really need any more than that. And now I'm just going to minimize this. That way it's not taking any of my resources up. Come on, After Effects. It's being super slow. There it goes. Here we go. Okay. Oh. No, thank you. Okay, so you're going to... Oh, you gotta be kidding me. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do new composition. Or not. Last time I closed out of that, it knocked me out. Okay. So, new composition. So what you're going to do is just do like HD TV 720. Don't worry about the frame rate because it's not the same, but we want to make sure square pixels, 1280 by 720. Frame rate, I'm just going to go ahead and do 24 frames per second. As soon as I do that, it's going to say customize here. And then the background color, I'm just going to go ahead and do a gray for now. And then right now it's set to 30 seconds. That's fine. Okay. But basically, this is what our settings were for when we were in Maya. I'll hit OK. And boom. Now we got our thing. Now what I need to do is bring in the footage. And this is the part that might be a little bit tricky or a little bit different than maybe things you've done before. So I'm going to right click, import file. You're going to navigate to that your images folder. You're going to select the first picture. You don't select all of them. you're going to notice that it already knows it's a sequence. See how it says PNG sequence? Now, if you had a different file format, it would be whatever sequence, but it knows it's a sequence. So you only click on the first one and hit import. And what you're going to notice is it treats it like it's footage, but there is an issue. By default, it brings it in at 30 frames per second because that's just the way that the settings are on After Effects by default. I don't bother changing them because I want it to be the same as what your guys' is. But you got to remember, it's an image sequence, so it doesn't have a frame rate, right? You're just imposing one. So we just need to change this real quick. So you're just going to right-click over top of it, interpret footage, go to main, and just change it from 30 to 24. And hit OK. And now it'll say 24 frames, which matches our composition. I'm going to drop it down in here. And then, I mean, nothing happens because it's just this. But you can see, there you go. And so from here, you would just edit it like you would edit any other piece of footage. And then, you know, send to Adobe Media Encoder, and you do your whole thing. And you can add audio and all that other business. But you just render out a video, and you would be good to go. All right? That's basically it. So, good luck. Godspeed.